And I'm delighted to welcome to the Googleplex author, physician, doctor of soul, and a modern-day guru of human empowerment, Dr. Deepak Chopra. Dr. Chopra began his life as a physician, a doctor of the body, but very soon he realized that his true calling was in being a doctor of the spirit. In fact, his versatility is clear from the fact that he's a member of the American College of Physicians, he's a professor at the Kellogg School of Management, and a scientist at the Gallup organization. And as soon as he realized this shift in how he wanted to touch people, he started speaking and writing about it, and so prolific that he's written 55 books, 18 of them on the New York Times bestseller list, on a variety of topics on mind, body, spirituality, health, human empowerment. And along the way, and check this out when you get your phones, he's created an Android app called Authentic Yoga, which you should all give it a try. And here to speak about his latest book, The Soul of Leadership, which you should all have copies for, I want you to join me in giving a warm namaste to Deepak Chopra, somebody Time magazine called one of the top 100 heroes and icons of the century, the poet, prophet of alternate medicine. Please join me with a warm namaste to Dr. Deepak Chopra.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi. So thank you very much for having me, and I have enjoyed the last 1 hour walking around this campus, being exposed to the spirit of this place, and I can authentically say that Google has a soul. There are a lot of places that have no soul whatsoever. So very happy to be here. How many of you actually ever think about the soul? How many of you don't think there is such a thing? Good. Just 2? Okay. Let me start with a little story, and then we'll get into, addressing the topic of today. The story goes back when I was about 7 years of age in India. My father was an army doctor. My little brother at that time was about 4 years of age. My mother was the best mother in the world. And we read in the newspapers, we were living in a small town, then small town, in the center of India called Jabalpur. And the newspaper said that Mr. Nehru, who was the first Prime Minister of India and the heir to Mahatma Gandhi, was coming to our little town. This, remember, about 15 years post-independence, to open an automobile factory. Nehru was a great hero for Indians at that time, a visionary, a statesman, as I said, the spiritual heir to Mahatma Gandhi. So there was a lot of excitement, and in our family there was only one discussion over breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that was what was the color of the sari my mother would wear for the occasion. And my father would, of course, tease her and say that no one was going to notice the color of a sari. So on the day Mr. Nehru arrived, my mother in a beautiful pink sari, and my father in his army uniform with his World War II medals, my little brother, then 4, now the dean of Harvard Medical School, and me, we were on the streets at 4 o'clock in the morning before the sun rose. And by about 6:37, there were millions of people on the street. And in India, when I say millions, it means millions, okay? It doesn't mean thousands or tens of thousands, it means millions. Seething masses of humanity. Wherever you could see, there were people. People on treetops, people hanging by window ledges, people on buses, people on each other's shoulders, rambunctious, rowdy, and really very noisy. And about 9 o'clock, Mr. Nehru's motorcade came by our street. He was standing in a jeep, wearing a white Nehru jacket, as we now call it. This is a Nehru jacket. And he had a rose, a red rose in his lapel, which was his signature, his trademark. And there was a jeep in the front, and there was a jeep in the back, a motorcycle or two. Pretty simple. And it slowly turned the corner and came by us. And as it went by us, Mr. Nehru seemed to turn around, look at my mother, and he took his rose out and he threw it at her. And the crowd gasped and stepped back almost, except for my mother, who kind of stepped forward like a queen, picked up the rose, held it up to great applause, and looked at my father and said, "Daddy, what did I tell you?" Okay. And now let's go home. So in that moment, as a 7-year-old, I kind of thought, boy, she's a great leader. You know, the real leader in the family. Although my father wore the medals and all that. We went home, and she emptied one room, completely took away all the furniture except for one table. And on the table, she put a vase and the rose. And for the next 3 weeks, people came to our house to look at the rose. It was quite something. They would come in India, you know, when you go to a house of veneration or a sacred place, you take off your shoes, etc. So they would come and take their shoes off and tiptoe into this room in silence, and they would just look at the rose. After 3 weeks, the rose started to fade, and my mother had a party. She invited all her friends, and at the end of the party, everybody got a faded rose petal. And you should have seen the attitude when they accepted that. It was like they were getting a diamond or a jewel. So afterwards, we asked our mother, my brother and I, what was so special about those rose petals? And she said something, you know, some things you remember forever, that became the genesis of this course that I now teach at the Kellogg School of Management, called The Soul of Leadership. She said those rose petals was symbolic of the soul of India. And at that time, I didn't really understand what that meant, the soul of a country. As I mentioned to you, when I came here, I felt that Google has a soul. When I go to Detroit, I don't feel that. You know, there's something very special when you think of soul, and I'll tell you what that means. But my mother explained that the leaders, in a sense, are the symbolic soul of a group consciousness, that they represent the dreams and the creativity and the longings and the aspirations and the intentions of a collective consciousness. And that collective consciousness could be a small unit, a family. It could be a company, business. It could be a community. It could be a country. It could be a political party. It could be the whole world. But the leader somehow embodies the collective dream. And so when somebody like a Martin Luther King Jr. says, I have a dream, obviously he's not speaking of a personal dream alone. It's the dream of a great zeitgeist, of an emerging longing for transition, for transformation, for change, for movement into a higher consciousness. So that kind of stayed with me as a theme, you know, that the soul represents a deep aspect of our core consciousness. Later, I went on to study medicine, and like anyone else, being programmed, indoctrinated into a completely materialistic worldview, I really became, like most of my colleagues, a great technician who knew everything about the human body and not necessarily a healer, because I knew nothing about the other aspects of human consciousness. So I used to wonder why you could have two groups of patients or two patients who had the same illness, the same treatment, the same physician, and yet have completely different outcomes. That's well known in medicine. So even though we know so much about biological systems as organisms that follow the laws of chemistry and physics and mathematics, if you will, there's something very unpredictable about human biology and its response to illness. So later I started to train in a field called endocrinology. For those of you who may not be familiar with that, it's the study of hormones, and then transferred to the field of neuroendocrinology, which is brain chemistry. And when I was in my training, this was a very interesting time, because for the first time as biologists, we were addressing the unsolved mystery of consciousness. We're all conscious beings. We're sitting here listening to each other. Our consciousness is responsible for our perception and for our thinking and for our emotions and our thoughts and our feelings and our longings and aspirations, our memories. And nobody as yet has figured out the mechanics of consciousness. It's the one totally unsolved mystery in biology. When I was in medical school, we had a very simple notion of consciousness. The human brain, or the brain, produces consciousness. Just like your gallbladder produces bile, and your pancreas produces pancreatic juice, and your stomach makes acid, your brain makes thoughts. So if you have thoughts and feelings and emotions and imagination, it's the dance of molecules. But actually, the more we understand about the human brain, or the brain in general, the deeper the mystery of consciousness gets. For example, your brain is actually more or less like a network of synaptic layers of tracks that have firings, electrical firings. So right now, if I asked you to imagine a sunset, can you see one? But there's no picture of a sunset in your brain. If I go to your brain, all I'll see is some electricity, that's all. Or if I ask you to imagine a sound, or ask you to remember something, I won't see any images or sounds or textures in the brain. All we see is neural networks that fire electricity. Similarly, we have no idea what causes perception. For example, when you see this color, what color is this? Red, right? And yet there's no red beam of light coming from here to your eyes. Some invisible electromagnetic radiation with a particular frequency that has no color. It hits your retina. It causes generation of electricity, which goes to your brain. And in your brain, there's no red color, and you see red. So where is the red? This in science, in biology, is called the hard problem of consciousness. There's a soft problem which has been solved, which means for every mental activity, there is a corresponding neural correlate. So if I tell you to imagine a sunset, I'll see which part of the brain acts up. There's no part of the brain that does not represent some kind of mental activity. But how we experience sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell, how we imagine, how we think, what is the mechanics of insight or intuition or creativity, no one has figured it out. a great English scientist by the name of Sir Arthur Eddington. He said the best explanation is that something unknown is doing we don't know what. We have no idea of the origins of consciousness. The materialistic interpretation is not valid anymore. There are scientists like Sir Roger Penrose, who was the thesis advisor of Stephen Hawking, who suggest that consciousness is actually a fundamental activity of the universe at Planck scale space-time geometry. Planck scale meaning 10 to the power of minus 33 centimeters, or 25 times smaller in order in magnitude than an atom. So if you go smaller, smaller, smaller to Planck scales and to what you might call the basement of the universe, everything disappears. You end up with a nothingness, a void. And so the big question is, what is this emptiness from where the whole universe is constantly arising and into which it is constantly subsiding? So people like Penrose and many others, in fact, we have a conference coming up called Sages and Scientists at our center in another 10 days, where we're bringing together some of the greatest scientists of the world to talk about the mystery of consciousness. But there's a number of scientists who are suggesting that at Planck scale space-time geometry, at that level, everything disappears. Matter, energy, space-time, the world of objects, and what you get is a field of possibilities which has the fundamental building blocks of the material universe as possibility. Spin, charge, space-time, gravity, but only as possibility, not as things themselves. And at that level, there is also Platonic truth, which is things like mathematical truth and musical truth and truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, evolution. And therefore, the fundamental levels of the cosmos contain the building blocks both of matter and of mind. And that our personal consciousness is a little drop in the ocean of consciousness. So, Sufi mystics like Rumi say, you're not just a drop in the ocean, you're the ocean in the drop. So this is where science is taking us right now. That our consciousness, that part of us that manifests as our mind and as our body, that projects itself as the body, and then the environment is actually non-local. Non-local means it does not exist in space-time. That it exists as a transcendent entity which is outside of space-time. So right now, as you're listening to me, try this. As you're listening to me, turn your attention to the listener. So as you're listening to me, just become aware of who's listening. And if you feel some kind of awareness, the subject of experience, that's your soul. It's not your mind, which might be saying, I wish I'd gone to the bathroom before the lecture, or whatever else. There's a consciousness, a presence, an awareness in which thoughts come and go, in which perceptions come and go, in which ideas come and go, in which the molecules of your body come and go. And so the great wisdom traditions of the world, particularly in the East, have said, hold on to that presence. It's the only part of you that's real. Because everything else is an impermanent pattern of behavior of that consciousness. So when you were a baby, that consciousness was there. It's there now. It was there when you were a teenager. It'll be there when you're an old person. And because it's transcendent and does not exist in space-time, it's eternal. And it's part of an impersonal field of awareness, which is a field of possibilities, which is proliferating with uncertainty because the laws of nature disappear here, which is a field of correlation, infinite harmony, it's part of the universe. That's why we call it universe, one song, okay, one symphony. It's a field of intentionality. It's a field of creativity. That's the worldview I hold personally, And that's the basis of everything I do, whether it's medicine or teaching business school or teaching people the principles behind intuition and creativity and all of that. That your brain is actually a place that represents events that happen in consciousness. And that consciousness is the source of all the things that make us very different in that from other animals, in that we have the capacity for self-awareness. We ask ourselves questions like, who am I? Where did I come from? Do I have a soul? Does God exist? The fact that we have insight and intuition and imagination and creativity and freedom of will, these are not attributes of neural networks, which are basically, just networks. They're neurons, they're physical things, and networks don't experience time or the past or the future or have aspirations and longings. Now, having said that, every event that you experience in consciousness does have a representation in the brain. So in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to make you all experts on neuroscience. So if this was your brain, let's say, you can make a fist. The wrist represents the spinal cord, okay? This part of the thumb, the base of the thumb here, represents something called the reptilian brain. The limbic brain is inside, but the reptilian brain is also called the midbrain. It evolved around 300 million years ago. So if you are close to a reptile and you make a sudden noise or a sudden movement, the reptile has something called a startle response. If you're very close, it'll attack you. If you're a little further away, it'll slither away. And this has become, over evolutionary time, it has become what is called the fight or flight response, which means when an animal is threatened, it either attacks or it runs. So when I was in medical school, the way we remembered the functions of the reptilian brain, because it has other functions as well, were the 4 Fs: feeding, fighting, fleeing, and reproduction. Okay? So this is, and it's all totally automatic. There's no thinking involved. It's reflexive. Now, if you open your fist up like this, then you see where my thumb is here. This inside of the brain is called the limbic brain, which is our emotional brain. And when we feel connected, then the limbic system is functioning well. We experience love and compassion, and we experience goodness, we experience kindness, we experience joy, we have equanimity or peace of mind. And you can see that when you're having those experiences, the limbic brain actually is firing very coherently. When you feel disconnected, or you feel fearful, or you feel threatened, then the limbic brain gets totally discoherent, and you experience things like hostility, resentments, anger, fear, shame, guilt, depression. The limbic system is not working properly. Okay, this is 100 million years old. The first one is 300 million years old. And then you have this huge part, this is the cortical brain, okay, which is only 4 million years old in evolution. So it's brand new, this part of our brain. And this part of our brain, which as I said is 4 million years old, and it grew explosively in the last 15,000 years. First with oral language, which is using noises to communicate with each other, and then with written language, which is only 5,000 years old, which means using squiggles to communicate with each other. And now with the internet, which is since 1995 commercially, only 15 years old, we are seeing a very rapid, explosive growth of this part of the brain. In fact, children who play with video games and are good at digital technology, you can see that the neural networks are growing so fast that it would have taken 100 years of evolution to do that in a few months. So we are now, through technology, literally, seeing the explosive growth of this part of our brain. The cortical brain, which has self-awareness and can actually override the midbrain and can heal the limbic brain so that one feels positive emotions. And this is giving us great insight into where the future of self-repair systems, because all biological systems know how to heal them, self-repair, self-evolve, self-regulate. So since I have this opportunity and I don't want to miss it, I'm going to just show you a couple of things. I'm going to take you through, can I do that? Take you through a little bit of meditative experience. So put your feet on the ground with your feet firmly planted. Sit relatively erect. Just 5 minutes and I'll show you the power of consciousness, okay? And take your hands and open them up and put them in your lap like that. And close your eyes and bring your awareness first into your heart, which is right in the center of your chest. And for a minute or so, experience gratitude, which is think of all the things for which you are grateful for. Your family, your friends, etc. All the things that you would count as your blessings. Now think of people in your life that you feel great love for. Okay, now leave all that and just observe your breath. Just observe it as it goes in and out. And notice that as you observe it, it spontaneously starts to slow down. And now you can mentally tell your breath to slow down even more. Slow down. Now bring your awareness into your heart and see if you can listen to your heartbeat. See if you can sense your heartbeat either as a sound or a sensation. Just focus and see if you can sense your heartbeat as a sound or a sensation. And now move your awareness from your heart into your open hands, into your fingertips, and see if you can bring your heartbeat into your hands. Can you feel the throbbing of your heartbeat in your hands? Increase the temperature of your hands. See if you can feel some warmth or tingling or throbbing in your fingers. Now bring your awareness into your face and see if you can transfer your heartbeat to your face and increase the blood flow in your face. Feel some warmth in your cheeks. And now just scan your total body quickly. So go over the limbs, the legs, the feet, the shoulders, the knees, the hips, the spine, the neck. Now bring your awareness into your abdomen, into your stomach, intestines. Into your lungs as they expand and contract, and back into your heart. Relax into your body. And take a minute to open your eyes. So I took all of 5 minutes really, no more than 5 minutes, to take you through a series of mental events where you put your attention and had a certain intention. How many people could feel that they could hear their heartbeat? How many people could transfer it to their hands? When you did that, you altered blood flow and circulation, and you actually lowered your blood pressure by 10 to 15 points. 80% of drugs are given for that range of hypertension. How many people could move the blood into their cheeks against gravity through intention? Okay, so all I'm saying is within 5 minutes, you can use your conscious mind to override your midbrain, which means this part, which is the fight-flight response, totally. You can activate the limbic brain just by thinking of love, compassion, kindness, joy, or people in your life. And you can literally rewire your whole brain through practice. And this is just 5 minutes of instruction. This is a new field in science. It's called neuroplasticity. And the operating phrase is neurons that fire together, wire together. So, great yogis in India have been doing this for thousands of years, where they can change their body temperature just with the flicker of an intention, lower their heart rate, change body circulation, lower blood pressure, change autonomic responses. And today we are finding out so much about this part of our brain. This is cortical brain, which is something called there's this little island there called the insula, which is like a hub, where, like, say, a hub, an airport terminal like Chicago, where all the flights come and go. So the insula is like a hub, and it sends messages to all the different parts of the brain and the body and receives messages, okay? And everything functions as an integrated whole, and you can learn to actually influence that, to self-regulate that. So you're no longer victimized by the midbrain into reactive responses. You just stop, you watch the impulse, and you let it go. You activate limbic brain, you activate intuition by asking questions, you activate creativity by incubating and gathering information. So for the first time, we have a deep understanding. We can watch what's happening in the brain through PET scans and CAT scans. And with the newer technologies, like this, for example, which I have in my pocket, which tells me how many calories I'm expending, how much energy I'm using, how long I sleep at night. You can wear headbands to monitor your brainwaves from a distance. And this morning I was at Cisco, and I spoke to 100 countries, 100 leaders, over 150 leaders in over 100 countries. And